Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Daniel Malik Levi, and I hope you're doing well tonight, or today, wherever you are in the world. You know, we all want success, don't we? We all want that promotion, that raise, that moment when the boss finally notices our hard work. Maybe you're scrolling through Instagram at midnight and you see your old college roommate posting pictures from their new luxury apartment. Or maybe you're sitting in traffic and a brand new Tesla speeds past you, and you think, man, when is it going to be my turn? It stings, right? That feeling. Like you're doing everything right, but somehow everyone else is getting ahead. And here's the thing. It happens to all of us at some point. We feel stuck. We feel invisible. We wonder if maybe there's a faster way, a shortcut, a backdoor to success. But what if I told you that sometimes those shortcuts come with a price? And I don't mean money. I mean something far, far more expensive. Something that money can never buy back. Tonight, we're heading to Surabaya, East Java, Indonesia, a city of heat, crumbling Dutch colonial architecture, and cutthroat commerce. This story comes from a man, let's call him Aditya. And Aditya made a choice. He took a shortcut. He invited something into his life to help him get ahead. And that something, it decided it liked working for him a little too much. So, turn on the lights if you need to. Get comfortable. And let's dive into this one. Let me paint you a picture of Aditya. He was 34 years old. Balding early. Stress will do that to you. He worked as a fixer for a mid-sized construction firm here in Surabaya. And when I say fixer, I don't mean the kind you see in Hollywood movies. I mean the guy who smoothed things over. The guy who made sure permits got approved. That contracts didn't fall through because some government clerk didn't get his coffee money. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Barely. And at that time, Aditya really needed it to pay the bills. His wife, Sari, was 7 months pregnant with their first child. A boy. They'd already picked out the name. Arjuna. Aditya wanted to give his son everything. A good school, a safe neighborhood, maybe even a college education abroad someday. But the numbers in his bank account told a different story. Here's the problem. There was a massive government tender coming up, a highway expansion project worth over 2 billion rupiah. That's about 130,000 US dollars. For a guy like Aditya, landing this contract meant a promotion, a new house, maybe even a car that didn't sound like it was falling apart every time he turned the ignition. His manager had made it clear, land this contract and you're golden. Lose it and we'll find someone who can close deals. The pressure was suffocating. But standing between him and that contract, a man named Budi. Budi was everything Aditya hated. He was older, well-connected, and notoriously corrupt. The kind of guy who showed up to meetings in a Lexus with tinted windows and left with signed contracts in his briefcase. Word around the industry was that Budi had dirt on half the procurement officers in East Java. He didn't just win contracts, he owned them before the bidding even started. Aditya had the better pitch, the better numbers, the better everything. But Budi had the relationships. And in Surabaya, relationships are currency. Aditya was desperate. He'd worked on his presentation for weeks, stayed up late running numbers, rehearsing his pitch in front of the bathroom mirror while Sari slept. But every time he thought about walking into that boardroom and seeing Budi's smug face, his stomach twisted into Nazi. He needed help. Real help. So when his uncle, a man who knew people, pulled him aside one evening at a family dinner and said, I know someone who can help. Aditya didn't ask too many questions. He just got in the car. They drove out to Sidorio, a district on the outskirts of the city. The roads got narrower. The streetlights got dimmer. The smell of sewage and street food mingled in the humid air. And eventually, they pulled up to a small wooden house with a red cloth hanging over the door. A dukun, a shaman. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, a dukun is like a spiritual consultant. They do everything from healing rituals to protective charms to love spells to, well, what Aditya was about to ask for. Aditya's uncle knocked 3 times. The door creaked open. The dukun was an old woman. She was thin, with gray hair pulled back tight, and her eyes were the kind that looked through you, not at you. Her face was deeply lined, weathered like old leather. She didn't smile. She just gestured for Aditya to sit on a woven mat on the floor. The room smelled of sandalwood and something sharper, something medicinal and slightly bitter. "You want to clear a path," she said. It wasn't a question. Aditya nodded, unable to find his voice. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes unblinking. Then she disappeared into the back room. Aditya could hear her moving things around, the clink of glass, the rustle of cloth. When she returned, she was holding something small in her weathered hand. It was a brass bell. A genta, about the size of a golf ball, with intricate carvings along the rim, symbols Aditya didn't recognize. It looked old. The kind of old that made you feel like it had been waiting for someone. "This," she said, placing it carefully on the mat between them, "is not a tool. It is a partner, a Prewangan." Now let me explain what that means. In Indonesian occultism, a Prewangan is what we call a familiar spirit, a spiritual entity that attaches itself to a person and helps them achieve their goals. These aren't demons, exactly. They're more like restless spirits. Often, they're the souls of people who were never properly buried or cremated. They're hungry, they're desperate, and they're looking for someone to give them purpose. But here's the catch. A Prewangan doesn't work for free. It feeds on your yang, your life force, your vitality, your protective energy. And in return, it gives you success, material wealth, power. But that success, it comes with a price. The Dukun leaned in close. Aditya could smell betel nut on her breath. "A Prewangan is like a loyal dog," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It will protect you. It will remove obstacles. It will clear your path of anyone who stands in your way. But you must feed it. And it gets jealous of other masters." "What do you mean, feed it?" Aditya asked, his voice cracking slightly. She didn't answer directly. She just placed the bell in his hand. It was cold, unnaturally cold, like holding a piece of ice that never melted. "Ring it once when you need help. But be careful. Once you start, it's very hard to stop. This spirit will do what you ask, but it will interpret your wishes in its own way." Aditya stared at the bell. His heart was pounding. "How much?" he finally asked. 5 million rupiah. That was almost all his savings. But Aditya thought about the tender, the promotion. Baby Arjuna. He pulled out his wallet. Because at that point, what choice did he have? 3 days later, Aditya was sitting in the boardroom for the tender presentation. The room was cold from the aggressive air conditioning, but Aditya was sweating through his shirt. Around the table sat 5 government officials, all looking bored and impatient. They'd probably already decided who was getting the contract. Booty was there, of course. Smug, confident. He was already shaking hands with the officials, like the contract was his. He'd brought an expensive leather briefcase and wore a Rolex that caught the light every time he gestured. Aditya felt the bell in his pocket. He didn't remember putting it there that morning. The presentation began. Booty stood up first, smoothing down his tie, flashing that politician smile. He cleared his throat, and his nose started bleeding. At first, it was just a trickle, a few drops on his upper lip, but within seconds, it became a flood. Blood poured down his face, onto his expensive white shirt, onto his presentation notes, splattering across the table. Booty's eyes went wide with panic. He stammered, trying to stop it with his hands, pressing his palm against his nose, but it just kept coming. Dark red blood seeping between his fingers. The officials were horrified. One woman actually gasped and pushed her chair back. Someone called for a medic. Booty was escorted out of the room, still bleeding, leaving a trail of red drops across the polished floor. The room fell silent. Aditya stood up. His hands were steady now. His voice was clear. He gave his presentation. Every word landed perfectly. Every slide transitioned smoothly. He answered questions with confidence he didn't know he had. And when he was done, the officials were nodding, smiling. 2 weeks later, Aditya got the contract. But that wasn't all. A month after that, Booty was caught in a massive corruption scandal. An anonymous tip led investigators to offshore bank accounts, falsified documents, bribes dating back years. Photos surfaced in the newspapers of him accepting envelopes full of cash. His company collapsed overnight. His assets were frozen. He disappeared from the industry entirely. Some said he fled to Malaysia to avoid prosecution. Aditya was promoted to senior fixer. His salary tripled. He bought a villa in the suburbs, 3 bedrooms, a garden with mango trees, a view of the Maas River. He traded in his sputtering old motorbike for a Honda CR-V with leather seats. His wife, Sari, was glowing, decorating the nursery in soft blues and yellows. The baby was healthy. The ultrasounds were perfect. Everything was perfect. Aditya felt invincible. At work, people treated him differently. With respect. Even fear. His manager clapped him on the back and called him the closer other companies started headhunting him, offering even bigger salaries. He was finally winning. Except for the smell. It started small. A faint whiff of burnt jasmine and incense in his air-conditioned office. Aditya thought maybe someone had lit incense in the lobby downstairs. But the smell followed him. To his car. To his home. To the nursery where Sari was folding tiny baby clothes. And then there were the bruises. One morning, Aditya woke up and noticed dark marks around his ankles. Purple-black finger marks, like someone had grabbed him. Hard dot. 4 distinct marks on each ankle, as if hands had wrapped around them. He showed Sari, trying to keep his voice light. Look at this. Weird, right? She frowned, touching the bruises gently. Does it hurt? A little. Maybe you bumped into something at work? The edge of a desk? But Aditya knew. He hadn't bumped into anything. Something had been holding him in place while he slept. Here's the thing about shortcuts. They work. For a while. But the universe, whether you believe in karma, cosmic balance, or just plain cause and effect, the universe always collects its debts. And the Prewangan? It was starting to get possessive. Sari was the first to really notice something was wrong. She was in the nursery one afternoon, folding baby clothes and humming softly to herself, when she felt it. A cold spot. Not the kind of cold from an air conditioner. This was different. It was damp. Clung to her skin like a wet towel, pressed against her arms. She stopped humming. She looked around. The window was closed. The AC was off. But she could see her breath misting in front of her face. And then she saw it. Her jewelry box, sitting on the dresser across the room, had been moved. Just a few inches to the left. But she knew she hadn't touched it. She was meticulous about these things. Her hands trembling, she walked over and opened it. Half of her necklaces were broken. Snapped clean in half, the chains twisted and bent as if someone had pulled them apart with their bare hands. Her grandmother's jade pendant, an heirloom she'd worn on her wedding day, was cracked straight down the middle. She'd told Aditya that night, her voice shaking. He tried to laugh it off, but his laugh sounded hollow even to his own ears. Maybe the clasp was loose, he said, not meeting her eyes. But he was lying, because he'd been seeing things too. At work, Aditya was sitting at his desk, reviewing a contract, when he caught a flicker in his computer screen. A reflection that wasn't his own. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and it was standing directly behind his chair. The figure had no features, just a dark silhouette, like a person-shaped void cut out of reality. Aditya's heart stopped. He spun around in his chair. The room was empty. Just the hum of the AC and the distant sound of someone talking on the phone in the next office. But when he turned back to his screen, his chair was still spinning, slowly, as if someone had just gotten off of it. That night, Aditya tried to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt it. A presence in the room. Watching. Waiting. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the moments before a thunderstorm. He smelled the burnt jasmine again. Stronger this time, and underneath it, something else. Something rotten, like spoiled meat left out in the tropical heat. His stomach turned. He opened his eyes. And there, At the foot of the bed was a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was solid, darker than the darkness around it, like a black hole in the shape of a person. And it was shaped wrong. Too tall, its head nearly touched the ceiling. Arms too long, hanging past where its knees should be. Fingers that stretched and curled like spider legs. Aditya couldn't move. His body was frozen. He wanted to scream, to wake Sari, to run, but his throat was locked shut. The shadow tilted its head at an unnatural angle, like a curious dog examining something it didn't quite understand. And then it smiled. Not with a mouth. It had no mouth, but Aditya felt it. The satisfaction, the hunger, the possessive affection of something that believed it owned him. You told me to clear the path. Aditya's blood ran cold. Ice flooded his veins. The shadow leaned closer, its faceless head inches from Aditya's frozen face. Your wife, she takes too much of your time. She is in the way. That's when Aditya realized the horrifying truth. The Prewangan hadn't just removed booty. It removed obstacles. Anyone and anything that stood between Aditya and his goals. And in its twisted, possessive logic, anything that took Aditya's attention away from it was an obstacle, including his wife, including his unborn child. The next morning, Aditya's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He called in sick to work, the first time in years. He grabbed the brass bell from where he'd hidden it in his sock drawer, wrapped it back in the red cloth, and drove straight to the Mass River. The river was brown and sluggish, choked with garbage and water hyacinths. The smell of sewage hung heavy in the air. Aditya stood on the concrete embankment, staring at the water. He pulled back his arm and threw the bell as far as he could. It disappeared into the water with a dull plop, sending up a small splash. It's over, he whispered, his voice breaking. It's done. I'm sorry. Just leave us alone. He waited, half expecting something to happen, but there was only the sound of traffic behind him and the cry of a crow in a nearby tree. He went home. He tried to convince himself it had worked. That night, Aditya woke up at exactly 3 a.m. The room was pitch black. The power had gone out, not unusual in Surabaya, but the timing made his skin crawl, and he couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. If you've ever experienced it, you know the feeling. Your mind is fully awake, conscious, aware, but your body is completely frozen. You can't move your fingers. You can't turn your head. You can't even blink. And you definitely can't scream. And Aditya? He could feel something crawling out from under the bed. It was gray in the darkness. He could somehow see it despite the lack of light, as if it emanated its own sickly luminescence. Skin pulled tight over bones. Its fingers were impossibly long, each joint bending in ways that defied anatomy, and they scraped across the floor with a sound like nails on concrete as it pulled itself forward. It moved slowly, deliberately, savoring his terror. It climbed onto the bed, and the mattress dipped under its weight. The springs creaked. It crawled up his legs, up his torso, its bony fingers leaving trails of ice on his skin. It leaned over Aditya's face, so close he could feel the cold radiating from it, like opening a freezer door. And it whispered, its breath smelling of grave soil and decay. You can't throw me away. Aditya's chest tightened. He couldn't breathe. The weight on his ribs was crushing, like someone had placed cinder blocks on his chest. His vision started to blur at the edges. Dark spots bloomed across his field of vision. And then he heard it, from the next room. A gasping sound. Choking. Sorry. Pure adrenaline shot through Aditya's veins. With every ounce of will he possessed, he wrenched his body to the side. Something inside the paralysis snapped. He rolled off the bed and hit the floor hard, his shoulder slamming into the tile. The paralysis broke. He scrambled to his feet and ran to the nursery, his legs barely working, stumbling through the darkness. Sari was on the floor, clutching her throat with both hands. Her lips were turning blue. Her eyes were wide with terror. Bloodshot, bulging. There was nothing visible on her. No hands around her throat. But Aditya could feel it. The presence, the shadow, the cold. It was suffocating her. Stop! Aditya screamed, falling to his knees beside her. Please, I'll do anything. Take me instead. Just leave her alone. The shadow didn't answer. The room remained freezing. Sorry, struggles were getting weaker. Aditya grabbed her hand. It was ice cold. Please, he sobbed. Please. She did nothing wrong. The baby did nothing wrong. This is between us. Just us. A long, terrible moment passed. And then slowly, Sari gasped and sucked in a ragged breath. She collapsed against him, sobbing uncontrollably, her whole body shaking. Aditya held her, his tears mixing with hers. He knew with absolute certainty, if he didn't end this, his wife and child would die. And it would be his fault. Aditya didn't go back to the dukun. He knew she wouldn't help him. She'd given him exactly what he'd asked for. This was his mess. Instead, he remembered something his grandmother used to say, when the darkness comes for you, run to the light. He went to a Tua Pek Kong temple. Now, for those unfamiliar, Tua Pek Kong is a Chinese deity, a god of protection and prosperity worshipped throughout Southeast Asia. Here in Indonesia, especially in cities like Surabaya with large Chinese-Indonesian communities, these temples are everywhere. Small neighborhood temples tucked between shop houses, incense smoke constantly rising. And they're known for dealing with spiritual problems. Aditya burst through the temple doors at dawn, wild-eyed and desperate. His shirt was stained with sweat. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The medium, a thin old man with a long white beard and kind eyes, was sweeping the courtyard. He looked up and immediately set down his broom. He didn't look surprised. I need help, Aditya stammered. There's something attached to me. It's hurting my wife. My baby. Please. I'll pay anything. The medium studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Come, he said simply. He led Aditya into the main hall, where red lanterns hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with sandalwood incense. At the center was an altar dedicated to Guanggang, the red-faced deity holding a guandao blade. The medium gestured for Aditya to kneel. He lit a bundle of incense and began chanting in Hokkien, words Aditya didn't understand but that felt somehow comforting, like a lullaby from childhood. Then he pulled out a chop, a carved wooden seal with red characters, and pressed it into a dish of bright red ink. You made a contract, the medium said quietly, not accusingly, just stating a fact. With a Prewangan. Yes? Aditya nodded, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know. I just wanted to succeed. I wanted to provide for my family. I didn't know it would. The medium held up a hand, silencing him gently. I know. But ignorance does not break a contract. We must sever it properly. Otherwise, it will never let you go. He pulled out a sheet of joss paper, thin yellow paper used in Chinese rituals for communication with the spirit world. This spirit has attached itself to your success, to your ambition. It feeds on your yang energy and gives you yin results, material wealth gained through spiritual debt. This is a very dangerous imbalance. The medium stamped the chop onto the joss paper with 3 firm strikes, then held it over the altar flame. The paper caught fire, but the flames burned blue. The temperature in the temple dropped so suddenly that Aditya's breath misted in front of his face. The red lantern swayed violently, though there was no wind. Candles flickered and nearly went out. Something was angry. The medium didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, focused. He continued chanting, his voice growing louder, more forceful, cutting through the unnatural cold. He pressed the chop to Aditya's forehead. The ink was still wet, and it burned. Not with heat, but with a searing cold that made Aditya gasp. The smell of burnt jasmine flooded the room one last time, so strong it was almost overwhelming. And then, silence him. The temperature returned to normal. The lantern stopped swaying. The candles burned steady and bright. The medium lowered the chop, breathing heavily. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. It's done, he said softly. The contract is severed. The Prewangan can no longer claim you. Aditya sagged forward, relief flooding through him so intensely, he thought he might pass out. Thank you. he whispered. Thank you so much. The medium placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. But listen to me carefully, young man. The money you made, the success you gained, it's yin money. Ghost money. It's tainted with spiritual debt. If you keep it, the shadow may find a way back. Spiritual attachments are attracted to yin wealth, like flies to rotting fruit. Aditya's heart sank. What do I do? Give it away. All of it. The villa, the car, the savings. Donate it to temples, to charities, to those in need. Clean your slate. Start again with clean money, earned through honest work. Only then will you truly be free. Aditya nodded, tears streaming down his face. I will. I promise. 6 months later, Aditya was living in a small apartment in South Surabaya. It was a modest place, 2 rooms, cracked tiles, a window that looked out onto a busy street. The air conditioning was temperamental. The neighbors were loud. He'd given away the villa to a charity that housed orphans, sold the car, and donated the money to the temple. His savings went to cancer research. Booty's wife, he'd learned, had died of cancer years ago, and Aditya wanted to do something good with the tainted money. He'd lost the promotion. His manager, disappointed by his sudden change in priorities, had demoted him back to regular fixer status. But he was alive. All right, let's take a breath here and break this down. Because this story, it's not just about ghosts. It's about balance. In Indonesian and Chinese occultism, a Prewangan is what we call a familiar spirit. These aren't demons. They're restless entities, often spirits of people who were never properly cremated or buried. In Indonesian tradition, if someone dies suddenly, violently, or without proper rituals, their spirit can become trapped between worlds, hungry, desperate, and they're looking for someone to give them purpose. Dukuns and practitioners of black magic sometimes capture these spirits and bind them into objects, bells, knives, amulets. Then they sell them to desperate people looking for success. But here's the catch. A Prewangan doesn't work for free. It feeds on your yang, your life force, your vitality, your protective energy. In Chinese metaphysics, yang represents light, warmth, life, activity. So it's you healthy, what keeps negative spirits away. And in return for draining your yang, the Prewangan gives you yin, material, wealth, success, power. But yin without yang, it's rotten, it's unstable, it decays, it attracts more darkness. I'm Daniel Malik Levi. Stay safe out there. And remember, trust the process. You're doing better than you think. The universe sees your effort, even when it feels invisible.